All right, we're gonna get started. It again, I just smile to see you present in your little boxes, knowing that Jerry, are you in New York? Where are you, Jerry?
Irvine, California.
Oh, you're close. You're good. Okay. I have Lindy right above you from sea to shining sea, participating. It just makes me happy to know that we're learning together. And once again, the opportunity for me to look at these Psalms closely has been a eye opener and a heart opener in terms of appreciating how much artfulness there is in each of the Psalms we've looked at, and how each of the Psalms that we've looked at also has its own distinctive message and moment and style. What the Psalms that we have looked at do share in common is that they are largely written about struggle of one kind or another. Sometimes it's celebration with the struggle in the background, but there's a sense of the world being dangerous. We saw that in the opening Psalm, Psalm 1, which foreshadowed what would come. And that's reality. Reality is that there is the danger of living, and at the same time, the possibility of finding celebration in life and comfort. The word ashrei of Psalm 1, which is translated as happiness, but really with the nuance of Hebrew, is calm contentment. Now, Psalm 35 somehow really pulls at me. And I share that what pulls at me is this is a psalm about betrayal, of mockery by those who the Psalter saw as his friends, saw as family, and they mock him. And check out this element of the poetry. The word nafshi. Last Psalm 34, we ended with a little bit of a discussion of nafshi because I had translated it as soul, largely because I'm working from an old template when I begin that I'm then changing, and it remained. The word nefesh can be soul. It's also life. It's also throat in Hebrew. In this psalm, nafshi, which I usually translate as spirit, because spirit is breath flowing through the mouth, it's life. For the rabbis, it's the lowest level of soul. In the Zohar, the Jewish mystical writings, there's three elements of soul which are abbreviated as narn: nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Nefesh is life, the quality of being able to breathe. Ruach is identified as a higher level of emotion, those being shared with animals. Nefesh and ruach, animated and feeling, and neshama in the Zohar is distinctly human consciousness or awareness. Nishmat Chayim, in the Genesis story, it's the breath of life that God breathes into Adam, and that's where you get that word neshama, also breath, but it's consciousness. That's when we're created in the image of God. And so this word, nefesh, is repeated 7 times. And we know that 7 is often purposeful. It means fully. And once, nafshenu, our soul, is used, and that's for the enemies. And that'll be in verse 25. So a common thread throughout this psalm is the repeated use of the word nefesh, particularly nafshi, over and over, 7 times: my soul, my soul, my life, my spirit. And that is again to say that this is a psalm that penetrates deeply. This is about the deepest pain, the pain of betrayal. I had a teacher, Rabbi David Hartman, a great philosopher in Jerusalem, and he said that the definition of pain is when you go to give somebody a hug and they recoil. They bring their arms back. And he said that sense of rejection, that's pain on that core level. And you'll see in this psalm, I often like to look at where's the middle of the psalm, the bullseye, if you will. And here, it's verses 13 and 14. And here's the middle of the psalm. Listen to him describe these friends. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth, and I afflicted my spirit with fasting. And my prayer, upon my bosom let it return. As though they were my friend or my sibling, I went about, as though mourning a mother in black and bowed. Well, that's the middle. But you'll see the next verse then is, but when I limped, they rejoiced, and they gathered against me like moral cripples, and I did not know their mouths open, and they were not silent. I didn't know. I was oblivious. I was naive. And there's one other signature component to this psalm, and that's the word ha'ach. Well, there's two others, actually, in terms of rare words. One is the word ha'ach, which gets repeated 3 times. I translate it as ha. I at one point did it as H-A-H-A, as you'll often see, abbreviated in a text for laughter. And in fact, Rashi, the great medieval commentator of France, 12th century, will say, ha'ach is joy. So it's a happy laughter. But I see it, and I'll share with you why in a moment, ha'ach here is ha. It's derisive. It's mocking. Oh. There's an element of joy, but it's the joy of derision. And here's why. The word Shoah means Holocaust. It's also a rare word. It doesn't appear anywhere in the 5 books of Moses. It's not a word I really even knew. It occurs 3 times in this psalm. This is a Shoah psalm. Shoah is the word used in Israel for the Holocaust. By the way, the word Holocaust was coined by Elie Wiesel about 15 years after those events. A Holocaust is a burnt offering, and he chose to use that word to elevate the lives of who he wished to elevate as martyrs. And he would want to teach that everybody who perished in the Holocaust, who was murdered, did so in a classic Hebrew expression, Kedushat Hashem, to sanctify God's name. And so he chose to call those events the Holocaust, the time of burnt offerings. He, by the way, stopped using the term after the TV series, The Holocaust, and he wrote an essay, editorial in the New York Times, saying that when the events called the Holocaust were presented on TV, with commercials trivializing the events, and with people being well fed rather than in fact emaciated, they were desecrating the memory of those, and he stopped using the word Holocaust. He would call it the cataclysm or the time of darkness. Shoah itself, the word, it's not clear where it comes from. Ibn Ezra, the great Spanish medieval commentator, says that it's from mishta'eh, which means to be dumbstruck by what you see, overwhelmed by what you see. Others say it comes from shimamon, which could mean utter destruction or desolation. That word appears 3 times in this psalm, and I see it as a Shoah dirge. But more than a dirge, this is written in the midst of Shoah, in the midst of this utter darkness, in which the pain, it doesn't have to be mass murder. In fact, last comment, and then I'm going to read, it's a longer psalm. What seems to be the issue here is not physical destruction, in contrast to Shoah. It seems to be a legal proceeding in which the psalter is accused of a capital offense. Classic commentators, Rabbi David Kimchi, see this as David fleeing Saul. Sforno would say it's David fleeing Absalom. So he In the classic mode, it's King David running for his life. But in the language used, in the opening, and we'll see it later in the middle, a reeve is a legal dispute. And it's as if the Psalter has been accused of some capital offense with the lies of his neighbors, setting him up for the use of the weight of the law, the instruments of power to bear down on him. That too has a Shoah dimension. I mean, what's distinctive about the Holocaust is that it was the state engaged in using its powers to destroy. And so I find this longish psalm riveting and painful. Let me read it. It's longer than most. It's 28, which I don't know if it's intentional, but in Hebrew, 28 is koach, meaning strength. So it's a response of strength. Actually, let me just say one more thing in terms of structure, and that is the last verses, 26, 27, and 25, all end with what in grammar would be called conditional verbs, or others call it jussive. It's let. So it's like, you'll see as we get to the end, let them not say in their heart, ha, our spirit. Let them not say we devoured him. Let them be ashamed and looking downward. Let them don shame. Let them sink gladly. So there's a quality of the verbs. In the last four, it's building to this crescendo where all the verbs are this kind of jussive quality of conditional. God, let this change. It's not with the same confidence of, I believe this will change. It's, make this happen. All right. Psalm 35.
Are you going to put it on the screen?
Oh, thank you. See, I get too eager to start. Okay. Thank you, Mimi. Let me move you. All right, here we go. Ha ha, Shoah and mocking friends. For David, strive, Adonai, against them that strive with me. Fight against them that fight against me. Take hold of shield and armor and rise up to my help. And unsheath the spear and battle axe against my pursuers. Say to my spirit, your deliverance am I. Let them be ashamed and disgraced. Those who seek after my spirit, let them retreat and be humiliated, who devise my harm. Let them be as chaff before the wind, with the messenger of Adonai chasing them away. Let their way be dark and slippery, with the messenger of Adonai pursuing them. For unprovoked, they have set their net trap for me. Unprovoked, they have dug away at my spirit. Let Shoah come upon them unawares, and the net that was hidden catch them. Into Shoah may they fall into it, and my soul will exult in Adonai, rejoicing in God's deliverance. All my bones will say, Adonai, who is like you, who rescues the poor from a stronger one, the poor and the needy from one who would rob them. Violent witnesses rise up, asking of me what I do not know. They repay my harm for good, bereavement for my spirit. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I afflicted my spirit with fasting, and my prayer. Upon my bosom let it return, as though they were my friend or my sibling. I went about, as though mourning a mother in black and bowed. But when I limped, they rejoiced, and they gathered against me, like moral cripples, and I did not know. Their mouths opened, and they were not silent. With malicious, mocking insult, they gnashed at me their teeth. My superior, how long will you look on? Bring back my spirit from their Shoahs, from the young lions, my unique being. I will praise you in a great assembly. Among mighty people, I will hymn you. Let not my lying enemies rejoice over me. Let not those unprovoked haters wink the eye, for they do not speak of shalom. Rather, against the land's quiet ones they plot words of deceit, and they open their mouths wide against me. They say, ha, ha, our eye has seen. You have seen, Adonai, do not be mute. My superior, do not be distant from me. Arise and awake from my legal matter. My God and my superior, for my strife. Judge me, Adonai, my God, by your righteousness, and let them not rejoice over me. Let them not say in their heart, ha, our spirit. Let them not say, we devoured him. Let them be ashamed, and looking downward together, who rejoice in my harm, let them don shame and disgrace, they who enlarge themselves over me. Let them sing gladly and rejoice, who delight in my righteousness. Let them always say, magnified is Adonai, who desires shalom of God's servant. And my tongue shall recite of your righteousness, and all through the day your praise. Powerful, isn't it? Let me just point out a few translation choices in this regard. I made a choice, in part because of Black Lives Matter, to translate Adonai as my superior instead of my master. Interestingly, as I looked over different translations, I saw that Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi and Rabbi Richard Levy had already substituted for my master, my superior. Literally, it means master. Like in modern Hebrew, Adon is Mr., right? So Adon Spitz, Mr. Spitz. So, but they made the change because of a consciousness that master was often identified with men as being superior. And so they chose a decade ago to substitute my master as my superior, but all the more in this moment where master is identified also with slavery. It just felt calling God my master didn't resonate for me. The hardest part, as I've shared with my translations, is taking out the pronouns of he for God. I keep it in rare cases when it's more about King David, but otherwise I make the he's, theys, and I put it into parentheses so that it's evident that I've changed, because the enemy is often referred to as he, but there too I prefer for fluency of our time to be non-gendered. Here's a case, verse 15, where I made a choice I don't make often, and that is I put in brackets what I felt was the context, but not the literal. So the word Nachim in the middle of verse 15 can be somebody who is crippled, and it's a contrast. One of the repeated things in this psalm, you'll see it over and over, are contrasting words and repeated words. And here, he's going to be limping in a moment, but he refers to the cripples and, that they gathered against me. So that gets interpreted in two ways. One is even the people who were Nachim, which are lowly or handicapped, even they gathered against me, meaning is a way to say even the most, if you will, distracted by the challenges of life, found reason to mock me. That's one way that commentators and translators understand in verse 15, Nachim. But I did see, I think it was Richard Levy, who put in parentheses moral cripples, and that's what it seemed to me to be describing. So again, that's in contrast with him limping at the beginning of verse 15. Now, in the next phrase, you got those who are mocking him. And when it's in Hebrew, it just karu, which literally means to tear or to tear open. Velo damu, and they were not silent. It seems to be that it's their mouths that are opened, and they were not silent. Though interestingly, the classic commentators, some of them, see this phrase of they were torn open and not silent as another totally different understanding. Dama can be silent, but dam can be blood. So this is David now speaking of how he was opened up and did not bleed. So that's just to say a dramatic example of how Hebrew words, any words, can be understood so remarkably differently. There's a lot to say about repetition of words. I'll just point out a few things. Here's another example of a choice in translation. So take verse 1. Riva Adonai rivive. Strive Adonai against them that strive with me. Lachem et lochamai. Fight against them that fight against me. So you get this repeating of the words that builds a sense of rhythm and emphasis. And verse 2. Hachazek magain vitzina. Take hold of shield and armor. V'kamu be'ezrati, rise up to my help. And here, verse 3, I translate it as unsheath the spear and the battle axe for emphasis. Though a lot of translations, the word sagor can mean closed. And so some people translate it as block the path against my pursuers. But I chose, because of the repetition motif, as do other translations, to see score as a battle axe rather than score as close a path. So there is choices throughout any poetry of how do you translate. This one, there were many. Here, check this out. Verses 5 and 6. Let them as chaff. Now that chaff is a reminder of Psalm 1, verse 4. Remember the evil, let them be like chaff blown by the wind, they who have no roots. So let them as chaff before the wind, resonating with Psalm 1 and that image. Blow them away. And malach is often translated as angel, and that is true, but it's also a messenger. It can be a human messenger. So in Hebrew, malach is always a messenger, but it can be either human or divine. So most probably translate this with the angel of Adonai chasing them away. I left it as messenger to create the ambiguity, because I love the ambiguity of poetry, and that's embedded in the choice of the word. So here, verse 5, with the messenger of Adonai chasing them away, let their way be dark and slippery, with the messenger of Adonai pursuing them. So again, you get this repetition of being chased and pursued, doche v'rodef, but the image of it being dark and slippery, meaning let it make them run, right? Being chased by your messenger, and make it slippery so they'll fall down. So that quality of the images that are being painted to pursue on a dark, slippery slant these people, that leads to, with this constant repetition of soul. Verse 7, it's actually verses 3, 4, 7, 9, 12, 13, 17, nafshi, 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 my soul, my spirit. He's being attacked. So one last one, And that's to point out the one time that it's not nafshi, but verse 25, it's elliptical. And how it's the other use. You get verse 8 and verse 25, this word of Shoah. One second. You get Shoah. Let me not get sidetracked. It'll appear one more time. I'll come back to that. But verse 25, let them not say in their heart, ha'ach nafshenu. Ha'ach is that exclamation. Again, no good translation. It's omnipoetic. Ha'ach. Ha. Nafshenu, our spirit. It's elliptical. What about our spirit? So that gets filled in a lot of translations. It's like, ha, our spirit is satisfied. Ha, our spirit celebrates in terms of seeing him, the Psalter, defeated, devoured. And then let them not say, we devoured him. But I also like in verse 25 that it's elliptical. The one time that spirit is used for the bad guys, nafshenu, ha'ach nafshenu, they're speaking. We have to fill in the blank of what it is that is true about their soul. And you can say, ha'ach, our spirit is contemptible. Our spirit is debased. You can fill in that in so many ways as you hear their celebration and how they define their spirit, their essence, their pulse of life. So there's a lot more to say, but it seems like a good time to pause, to stop. We're almost at 10:30. And tomorrow, a shorter psalm, also a remarkable psalm that I call Reflections on Rationalization. It's an old, here too, the Psalter is reflecting on the power of bad people to rationalize what they do. You can in some ways see it almost as an extension of this. But this psalm, to pull it together and then to gain 5 or 10 minutes of your reactions, this psalm brings to mind those images of Jews living in Germany before the war, having fought in World War I as soldiers for the German state, feeling at home, voting in the elections that bring the Reich Party to power, feeling as if this was their country, their language, their composers, and those who were their neighbors will turn on them, literally leading them to the trains to take them away from their well-secured homes, their successful careers. And this psalm for me, although it's of course written 2,000 years ago, when our peers in Israel needed a word to define the darkness of those atrocities, they picked that rare word found 3 times in this psalm, that word Shoah, and embedded in a psalm that deals with betrayal by those for whom you felt were your extended family, turning on you. As a child of Holocaust survivors, this particular psalm just chills me in its power. With that, I stop the share so I can see all of you and take 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll close with a Kaddish. If there's
Rabbi?
a couple of reactions, Jerry, go ahead.
I just mentioned, I work with Robert Alter's version. I noticed that in verse 25, he says hurrah for ourselves. He uses hurrah instead of ha-ha.
Yeah. I too use Robert Alter to prepare Jerry, because
I know.
The strength of Robert Alter, he was a professor of literature at Berkeley, with his book, the Book of Psalms,
Right.
is that he's very attuned to the literary nature. And as a contemporary scholar, he, more than any of my commentators, will suggest that lines are corrupted by the scribes. And he'll bring that element of sometimes suggesting that the ellipses are simply missing words. But I find him very valuable. So hooray, to come back to Jerry's Robert Alter, is the way that ha, hooray, hooray for us.
Yeah.
But I see it, again, my feel for the context is so much more derision.
Yeah.
But with
Rabbi,
joy,
I
with a
just want to say
sense.
one more thing. I
Yeah.
was also David Hartman's student, so I wish we could talk offline about him.
Well, let's do that, Jerry, at some point. And I will add there will be a public presentation for CSP with Robert Alter, I think July 26th.
That's wonderful.
And he'll be specifically giving a talk on the challenges of translation. He
Oh, that's great.
recently having finished translating all of Hebrew scripture. So, so Mike, we have a few people wanting to add. Mike, and then Lindy and Hal, and then I'll pull it together.
Thank you. I listened with a great deal of interest the comments you said about ahach. As I was reading it carefully before the session and even during, so I'm referring to 14, verse 14, as a friend, as a brother, and so on. So when I read 25, I see ach as brother in one of two contexts. One, brother, literally a sibling, and second, in colloquial Hebrew, ach is like a friend, is one of my people. So when he talks about, in verse 25, about al yomru belibam ach nafshenu, let them not say in their heart, this brother has our souls, because the second part of the verse, we devoured him. They're talking about the ach, not about this exclamation point of ach. So I literally read this as ach in one of two contexts, brother or one of my people, as it is in colloquial Hebrew, ach.
So let me just build on Mike's insight, and that is 3 times we have this word ha'ach, twice by this, all put into the mouth of the bad guys, right? And the tension that Mike points to is that in Hebrew, ach means brother, and colloquially is often for, achi, my buddy is ach. So that there's a tension even in this exclamation of what's being exclaimed. So that's a good insight and adds again to the tension of this chosen word. Lindy and then Hal, and then I'll pull it together.
No, the word, what you said about you, how you feel as a child of a Holocaust survivor, this psalm, when I read it, strikes, and we have a group that reads Psalms every morning, and this song strikes at my heart because it's saying to me, be careful, you don't know if you're really safe anywhere. That's what this psalm screams to me.
So
Because I go through our history and go, we always thought we were here for how long, and that's what that psalm.
Thank you, Lindy. Thank you for emphasizing this quality of this psalm of beware. The world is dangerous. Though I'll add to that, beware of betrayal, because that's the key motif here. I was betrayed, and I was so, clueless. Beware of not being naive to the dangers.
You believe that you can trust,
Right.
and you trust.
Right.
And
so
then,
don't be a fool. And again, I know and see too much conning going on. And I am deeply, deeply aware of the many times I have been literally conned in the marketplace. I have things hanging on my walls. One of them is a necklace that I got conned thinking it was something that it wasn't. And I keep it there just to be remembered that in my so-called sophistication, I can be also easily conned. So Hal,
I just
closing
want to
word.
say, I see the emergence beginning in verse 11, almost through to the end, the theme of hate speech that is repeated and referred to over and over again, and the damage that exacts on us.
Thank you. And thank you in particular, Hal, for pointing out verse 11, because what I didn't identify is that this psalm is usually divided into two parts. Verses 1 to 10 describe the person's predicament, but verse 11, that's exactly as Hal said, that's when the enemy's nature begins to be described to the end. So that's the second half of the psalm. And it's the language that's used describing the enemy is it's an enemy of hate. And one must be aware of the enemy who looks friendly and yet behind your back and even in your face lies. So to end on a happy note, we got to end on a happy note. The Psalter wrote these words in the midst of pain. And think about this marvel that here we are more than 2,000 years later. And that's the power of culture. It's the power of words, that they travel through time. And here we are resonating, feeling wiser, and having expression for our own longings with words across many generations. With that, other words that are across generations, that of Mourner's Kaddish, honoring the chain of life. I invite those observing a yurtzeit or who are in mourning to honor your loved ones as we join together with the reciting of Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal,
Yitgadal,
Kadash,
Yitkadash,
Shemei Rabah,
Rabba,
Be'alma,
Yalma,
Divrach,
Divrach,
Kirute,
Kirute,
V'Yamlich
V'Yamlich Malchute,
Malchute,
V'Chayechon, V'Vyomechon,
Chaye B'chol Beit
V'Chol Yisrael,
Yisrael. Ba'agala
Ya'ala Bisman Kari,
Vimru
Vimru,
Amen.
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 Yehei
Yeshmei, Rabba,
Rabba
Mevarah,
Mevarach Le'olam
Mei
Omer
Amaya,
Omaya Yitbarach
Yitbarach,
Yishtabach
Yishtabach, Yitar,
V'yitahar
Yitramam,
V'yitromam V'yitnaseh
Yitnaseh,
V'yitalach
Yitzhak,
V'yitalech
Yitalech,
V'yitalach
Yitalach,
Shemei
Shmei, Tikudashah,
Kusha B'richu
Richu,
Le'ela
Leila,
Min
Min
Kol
Kol Birchata,
Birchata V'shirata
B'shirata, Tishbechata,
Tushbechata V'nechamata
V'nechemata,
Damiran
Damiran
Be'alma
Be'alma,
V'mru Amen.
V'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yehei
Yeh
Shlama
Shlama
Rabba Min
Min
Shemaya
Shmaya,
L'chaim
V'chayim
Aleinu
Aleinu,
V'al
V'al
Kol
Kol Yisrael,
Yisrael V'imru
V'imru
Amen.
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 Osei
Aseh Shalom
Shalom
B'mimah,
B'mimav Hu
Hu
Ya'aseh
Yaseh
Shalom
Shalom, Aleinu
Aleinu
V'al
V'al
Kol
Kol
Yisrael,
Yisrael V'Kol
V'al
Yoshvei
Kol Yeshvei
Tevel
Tevel,
V'imru
V'imru Amen.
Amen. Thanks again for joining together. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow as Psalm 36, Reflections on Rationalization. Have a good day.